Hi there, it's Rob. Welcome to the second of our Qlab screen tutorials. Today in this tutorial we're going to look at audio cue basics. We're going to start to add and control audio cues in Qlab. So in this tutorial we're going to be looking at settings in the cues, so setting things like levels and outputs and stuff like that within a cue via the inspector. So we'll look at the inspector panel at the bottom of the screen. We'll also look at setting follow-on cues, so that's cues that happen automatically after a previous cue is fired. We'll also take a quick look at organising with using groups. A group cue is a specific cue in Qlab which we can use for organising different cues. And then finally we'll look at fading some of those audio cues. So, clicking straight over to Qlab then. So if you remember last time we added some audio cues. There's two cues here, one running straight after another. And we had a quick listen through and we stepped through the cue list. Now, what we didn't do at that time is we didn't look at the properties of each individual cue. So if I just play this cue here, that's the thunder rumble, and the next one is the creaking door. Now just stopping that for a sec, if I click on the creaking door, what I'm now going to look at is we're going to look at the settings for that particular cue. So there's some information here. Action here gives us the time of the cue, so that's 20 odd seconds. And the pre-wait and post-wait are to do with how the cue is fired when the kind of go signal was given. So there's some information there, and this information on the right-hand side of the cue list is also shown up in this first tab of the inspector. Now the inspector here is the panel in Qlab that shows specific properties for a particular cue. So there's a number of properties in the first panel. The pre-wait and post-wait, which is also up here on the screen in the cue list. There's the type of follow-on. Again, that's something which is also set in the cue list, but you can set it down here as well. So there's two types of follow-on cues, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Down here is a colour, and what that does is it basically sets the colour of that particular cue in the list. So if we wanted to particularly make a set of cues a colour in a list so we could easily identify them, we can always pick a colour that way. So I've just set that to blue. I just close that away. You can see when I click off that cue appears as a blue stripe. So that's one way of organising your cues visually, so you can kind of quickly see what each one is. The next checkbox down here in the info panel for a cue is called armed. Now that's quite a important checkbox, because what you can do when the checkbox is armed, it basically means that the cue will work within the list. When the checkbox is not checked, these little lines here, kind of grey diagonal lines, come across the cue, and what that means is it means that the cue will not play when you run through the cue list. The reason that you would want that, rather than just deleting the cue, is there may be some reason why you specifically don't want a cue or a group of cues to play for any reason without actually having to delete them, and in case you wanted them back again. So if you had a cue where a director decided that they wanted to see the scene without a particular sound in it or whatever, you could always disarm the cue, and it would mean that you wouldn't actually lose all of the stuff that you'd done, including setting a file and setting any times to it. So that's what the armed button does, and that's kind of quite important. So clicking onto the next tab is the triggers. Now this is kind of something we don't deal with a lot. The MIDI we don't have a lot of dealings with our Qlab install, and a hotkey. So that's that tab is not so relevant to us at the moment. The next tab is very relevant because it gives you a number of things. It gives you the opportunity to change the output on the particular cue, so send it to a different part. Now I've got mine set to the built-in output on my Mac, but I could have sent it to these two other sound outputs on this Mac. If you have a Mac with a number of different audio output devices, you can select it there. That basically says where you're going to send the cue to. You've also got some information on where to start and stop the cue, and this little graphical window here with some controls here so that you can start and actually edit the start or end or the looped section of that particular audio file. So you don't have to start the cue from the very start of the audio file. You could start it a little way in. You just leave the audio file as it is, but you kind of sort of make a temporary edit via Qlab. Again, the last piece of information here is the play count, so you can loop it a number of times, or you can just have it infinitely looping. So the settings tab on the the inspector is reasonably important for us. The next two tabs are kind of a sort of have a similar thing. They basically both run control the volume of a particular queue and the outputs as they're sent to different things. We'll come back to that in a minute, but basically for the moment the main thing you can sort of worry about is the master volume here. If the master volume is at 0 or minus infinity, that basically means that there's no volume coming out of that queue. So that's something that you would want to check if you were having a problem with the queue. You need to go to the levels or to the trim and just check that you have output here as you wish. Now obviously if the queue is too loud, you could control the queue via your outputs on the sound desk or whatever, but the point of Qlab is that you can kind of program the output levels within Qlab, so you don't actually then have to go back and adjust the sound output devices. You can just do it within the program. So the other information then, just in the info tab, in the notes section here you can write some notes and things and they appear up in the window during your show. And the other things you can change, again, are things that you can change in the queue list window. So the queue number and the queue name and also the target, they're things that you can change within the queue window. So we've got two audio files here. The second one is our creaking door. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find another audio file. Let's find something else. How about knocking on a door? So I'm going to drag the knocking on the door audio cue in. We'll just have a quick listen to that. You can hear that knocking sound there. What we could do is we could always put the knocking cue in front of the creaking door. So what the first cue is the storm, and at the moment that just runs once. What I want to do with the storm is I'm going to change it so that it actually loops. So I'm going to set it to an infinite loop, and what that means is that storm is going to carry on in the background. The thunder rumble is going to carry on in the background all this time. Now the levels on this thunder rumble are quite quiet because it's quite a quiet cue. If I just play that now, you can see here the levels going up and down. They're quite quiet. But what you will see now is when it gets to the end of the cue, it'll play again. So it carries on playing and basically goes around in a circle until we tell it to do something else. The next cue in the list is our knocking on a door. So what we're going to do now is let's play the knocking on the door cue. And that's 33 seconds. And so the next cue after that is our creaking door opening. So let's have a listen to that. Great. So the first cue we've got is a loop cue, and that's going to kind of just loop on. So I could change the name of this to Storm Loop or Thunder Loop. Thunder. Okay, and the next cue is our knocking on the door. So what I want to happen is I want the knocking on the door cue to be immediately followed by the creaking door opening. So as soon as that cue's finished, I'm going to have it follow on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this arrow over here on the right hand side, and I'm going to click within this box here. Oops. And so this arrow here, I'm going to click it until it's got a sort of little circle on the top of it. And what that's setting it is setting it to follow from the next cue as soon as it's finished. So where it says action 35, that's how long the cue is. The post wait is how long it's going to wait before this follows on. And what effectively it means is it's going to follow on as soon as the cue's finished. So let me just play that first one. So I'm going to load this cue up. You can see the knocking on door cues firing now. You can also see the post wait is counting down with it as well. So you can see when you get to the end of that cue, got a number of seconds to go. Okay, so I didn't press go there, and as soon as the queue, knocking on door queue, which is what we'll call now Q2, and the creaking door Q3 went straight after it. Now, that was because we had our follow-on set to the follow-on, which is auto continue, which basically fitted in this box here, or also in the info tab, which is auto follow. Now, if we clicked it so that it was just had an arrow without a dot on top of it, a slightly different thing would happen. So let's just run these cues again and have a listen. So when I hit go then, the knocking on door started and the creaking door started exactly the same time. So that fired, because it's got a post wait of 0 seconds, it fired exactly after the first cue had gone. So that's kind of a good way of running multiple cues at exactly the same time. If you change the post wait on those cues, you could obviously make them start so that the creaking door started a number of seconds in to the previous cue.